Welcome to Chicago Sports Overtime. I'm Chris Kwasinski. We got a special draft episode where we're going to take a look at the NFL Combine coming up. And with me to discuss that is ESPN draft analyst and draft nerd, Matt Miller. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You got the titles right off the bat. I love it.
Perfect. I'm a big fan of draft nerds. I've been one for years. I want to take a look specifically at the Combine going forward. Obviously, being in Chicago, this is a big draft town. There's so much to talk about, so much to look at. But when you think about the draft this year, what's the one thing that sticks out in your mind when it comes to either players or personnel? What's the one thing that you think of when you think of the 2025 NFL draft?
This draft is really bolstered by the trenches. I think when you look at the defensive tackle class, the edge rusher class are both incredibly strong. I have 30 defensive tackles ranked in my top 120 players right now. That has never happened in the history of, I've been doing this job 15 years. I've never seen a defensive tackle class like this. And then I think on the offensive side, it is an underrated year for positions like guard and center. And I know Bears fans' ears are perking up because these are the areas when I talk to Bears fans on social media, when I do radio in Chicago, these are the areas the Bears really need to address early. This draft lines up exceptionally well with the Bears' needs. It also lines up well in that there aren't as many top-tier blue-chip players. You know, the guys whose names you're going to know as we head into late April. But there are a lot of middle first to middle second round instant impact starters. And the Bears have 3 picks in the top 50 picks. So it is a really good year for them to need trench help. It's a really good year to have those 3 picks in the top 50.
When you mentioned the trenches specifically, I know that's obviously music, like you said, to Bears fans' ears, especially now they have the entirety of the interior offensive line to figure out. When you look at guards and tackles, what comes to mind when it comes to the top tier? Because obviously Will Campbell's one guy that sticks out to me specifically. That's a guy who could kick inside, was a tackle at LSU. How do you evaluate the top of the offensive line class?
Yeah, it fits up well. Will Campbell from LSU is a top 10 player. Kelvin Banks from Texas, another top 10 player. And interestingly enough, 2 guys who started for 3 years in the SEC. Both guys started week 1 as true freshmen, had a beautiful 3-year run, and now they're headed to the NFL. And both are players that a lot of NFL teams think could play inside at guard due to height or arm length concerns. It really sticks after that. A lot of the top tackles, guys like Josh Connerly from Oregon, Armand Membo from Missouri. They're players that teams look at and say, well, you could also be a really, really good guard prospect. So this tackle class isn't incredibly strong, but it has made the guard class great because so many people think that these tackles will kick inside. And the same at the center position. Gray Zabel from North Dakota State made himself a ton of money at the Reese's Senior Bowl, showing that he can play up at a higher level and be a premier center prospect. Tyler Booker from Alabama, who we didn't get to see at the Senior Bowl, but we'll see at the Combine next week, will be a first-round pick at guard as well. So the top end of the guard class is really good this year.
When you talk about guards specifically, obviously we kind of caution against, hey, would you really take a guard in top 10? We saw Jonathan Cooper was one of those players a long while ago. It didn't really work out for the Cardinals, but with Tyler Booker, it feels different because, like you said, with the trenches and the talent that's so great this year, how do you evaluate maybe the potential of taking a guard in the top 10, whereas that's usually not the norm?
It's not the norm, but taking a right tackle at 10 wasn't the norm either. Darnell Wright has worked out. And I think you have to evaluate it class by class. In a class like last year's, taking a guard in the top 10 would be criticized very, very heavily because there were quarterbacks, wide receivers, a generational tight end prospect. But in a class like this that lacks those blue chip, all pro type players, I think it does change things. And when you can secure a position for at least 5 years, maybe 10 years with 1 draft pick, I think there's always value in that. So if you have conviction that Tyler Booker's going to be your right guard or left guard for the next decade, then it's a good pick. I think where it would be most beneficial, in my opinion, if you're the Bears, is to draft one of the players that you mentioned before, Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks, with the idea that if Braxton Jones leaves in free agency after the 2025 season, you have a player who has experience at tackle that could kick outside after having a year in the NFL.
When you mention Armand Membo specifically, I know we were talking about this beforehand, but we were part of the Luther Burden fan club, and we're going to get to him in a little bit because I really want to talk about him. But Armand's another Mizzou kid that if you put on the tape from South Carolina, he looked really good against some really good, honestly, NFL defensive linemen in that specific game. When you evaluate a guy like that, a guy who's extremely athletic, really young, how could his combine performance, his interviews, how could that influence the top 10 with a guy like Will Campbell, who I don't know if he gets out of the top 10, I don't know if he gets even to 10 with the Bears, but how do you see a guy like that who could build his stock influencing the top 10 and how offensive linemen head and maybe the top 15 of the draft?
We see it happen every year, honestly, where someone kind of comes out of nowhere. Membo was the guy this year. Personally, and I'm from Missouri, I didn't know he was going to declare. We thought, hey, he's got another year. He'll probably go back, strengthen his stock. The tape was too good. You mentioned the South Carolina defensive line was the best in the country last year, and he absolutely handled them. He has great agility. He turns 21 in March. He's incredibly young. And he has already helped himself when he measured at the Senior Bowl, and his arm length was over 34 inches because so many people thought, hey, he's going to be short-armed guy because he's under 6'4". He might be under 6'4", but he has the arm length that everyone wants, that scouts want at the tackle position. So he's fascinating because he's been a right tackle only at Mizzou, but he has that great agility that you mentioned to where he's going to be so good pulling, trapping, as teams are moving to so many more outside zone running schemes. A player like Membu, whether it's at guard or tackle, has a ton of value. So I wouldn't be surprised if 10 to the Bears, 11 to the 49ers, 13 to the Dolphins. That feels like his range right now.
And when you specifically talk about the influences of the top 10 of the NFL draft, one thing that really stuck out to me is that there's really no number one wide receiver right now. I know last year, obviously, we had Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. They were all in the conversation. But right now, it doesn't seem like there's a clear-cut number one wide receiver. How could that combine influence who becomes the number one wide receiver, but also influences how that shakes out the top 10 as well?
The combine is important for breaking ties. That's how I've always viewed it. And so this year, as you mentioned, we have Luther Burden from Missouri, Tyrell McMillan from Arizona. Travis Hunter's kind of over there by himself because he's going to be listed at corner, but he can play wide receiver, obviously. So everyone's waiting to see who's going to emerge, who's going to separate themselves. If Luther Burden comes out and runs a 4.4 in the 40-yard dash, he's going to remind people of the fact that he was, a number one recruit coming out of high school. If you go back and look at his sophomore tape at Missouri, when they had more of a well-rounded offense and defenses weren't bracketing him on every play just to take him out of the offense, people are going to be reminded how great of a prospect he is. I'm still a huge believer of his. I still think he's a top 13 or 14 pick in this draft. And that's after we see a couple quarterbacks go and a run on offensive linemen. It's going to happen in the late single digits and early teens.
To go back to the Luther Burden fan club, because I was there when he committed. I used to cover Mizzou. I covered that season you're talking about, the 2023 year where he just burst into this to honestly the SEC and became an All-American in that specific way. His catch radius was insane and still is. And I think that South Carolina game, we talked about that for Armand. You could do the same thing for Luther because there was questions about his durability, his questions about all this stuff. He was, like you said, he's getting bracketed every play. But in that play, he made the go-ahead touchdown in the final minute. This is a guy that has always impressed me the most, but it's because he could do a lot, not just catching, but special teams. We're also talking about gadget plays in the run game, that kind of stuff too. How important are those aspects, special teams, when it comes to evaluating other, like you said, Travis Hunter, which they're incredible athletes, but maybe they don't factor into the run game, the special teams game as much as a guy like Luther has proven at the college level?
Yeah, it's going to matter team by team, but I think when you have Ben Johnson as your head coach, you want to be as creative as possible. And someone like Luther Burden adds an element, and it's almost that Deebo Samuel element of you can put him in the backfield, you can put him in the slot, you can split him out wide, he could be your punt returner. They become a do-it-all type player, and I think that's where you get excited about what Luther does. Also, he's bulked up, he's added strength. He was at 210 to 215 pounds this past year because he wanted to be more physical. He knew he was going to see more press coverage, so he worked on improving that element of his game. Ryan Poles and staff, I'm sure, will be talking up this quarterback group when we all get to Indianapolis, and the reporters are buzzing around. They're going to say, who looks pretty good? Jackson Dart and Quinn Ewers from Texas. They should be top 10 picks because that increases the chance that a true blue chip player could be pushed down to number 10.
Fox 32 Chicago is your home for the NFL Scouting Combine.
All next week, join Lou and Anthony with Cassie Carlson live from Indianapolis.
The search for the Bears' next Pro Bowler is here.
Scouting the future on Fox Local, fox32chicago.com, and YouTube. Streaming Tuesday through Thursday at 1.
Lou, what you doing?
Hey, Caitlin, I'm looking for this stream everyone's talking about.
Fox Local?
Yeah.
Get me. App Store, download Fox Local, open it, pick Chicago, boom.
Oh, that was easy. Hey, Paris. Hey, I got this stream on my phone finally.
I'm on there.
Everyone's on this thing.
Now you can watch Paris on Politics anytime, anywhere.
Hey, Anita, I'm on Fox Local.
I know, Lou. I watch you on Bears Blitz on Fox Local.
Fox Local. This is big stuff.
Glad I could help.
It's one of the ways that I know that this first round could shake up. Obviously, it's going to go specifically in Chicago. The focus is going to go into the top 10 because that's what the Bears pick. They are potentially going to get more picks in the third round, depending on what happens with Ian Cunningham taking the Jaguars job. But specifically, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we've seen curveballs happen in the first round. Last year was Michael Penix Jr. What kind of curveball, what could we expect? Maybe you could think about what position or what team could throw that curveball in the 2025 draft.
It's always the quarterback position, especially if we see Cam Ward from Miami and Shedeur Sanders from Colorado come off the board in the top 3 picks. If that happens, then we have teams like the Las Vegas Raiders at 6, the New York Jets at 7, the New Orleans Saints at 9. Those are your curveball teams where you're watching to see, okay, what are they going to do? Are they going to reach for Jackson Dart from Ole Miss at quarterback? Are they going to go best player available, which could hurt the Bears? If the Jets have 2 offensive tackles who are free agents, the Jets could certainly go offensive line. The Saints are in a massive rebuild. They are $55 million over the salary cap, so they just need as many good players as they can get right now. So I think if you're a Bears fan, that is something to watch. You want as many quarterbacks as possible to go in the top 10 if you're a Bears fan, because that's just going to push down more position players to you. So Ryan Poles and staff, I'm sure, will be talking up this quarterback group when we all get to Indianapolis, and the reporters are buzzing around. They're going to say, you know who looks pretty good? Jackson Dart and Quinn Ewers from Texas. They should be top 10 picks because that increases the chance that a true blue chip player could be pushed down to number 10.
Yeah, and especially when you think about Jackson, I mean, that's a guy that obviously didn't get to play in the college football playoff. It was a guy that had a lot, I don't know if questions is the right word for it, but I mean, when you don't get to have the same success that maybe Cam Ward does, you saw how good he was in the bowl game, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, in the first half at least. But when you think about other players, not just the quarterbacks, what about Tyler Warren? Because this is a guy that was, in my opinion, when you look at the Fiesta Bowl and the Orange Bowl, you could make the argument he was the best player on the field. I mean, he was out there making plays left and right. What do you think about his candidacy, how that could affect the top 10? Because obviously he's a great pass catcher, but in the run blocking game too, I see Carolina as a team that might maybe take the risk and go up there and take him, kind of throw that curveball if no one else is going to. But how do you see as a player like that, and maybe even others, affecting the back end of the top 10, how that could shape up the rest of the first round?
Well, I think there's 2 guys that are hard to project because they don't play premium positions. Ashton Jonty, the running back from Boise State, Tyler Warren, as you mentioned, the tight end from Penn State. They are the hardest players when you sit down to do a mock draft to figure out where they go, because you're essentially betting on a team making a decision that's not rooted in positional value. So it's, okay, what team would just go best player available and pull the trigger on those guys? And I do think that you look at the Jets at 7 are certainly in that mix if the quarterbacks are gone, where they would say, let's just get the best player we can, and we'll figure these other positions out later in the draft. So Tyler Warren is special. He's a top 10 player for me, as is Ashton Genty. But Warren is everything you want at the tight end position, with massive size, but he has short area quickness. He can run after the catch. He can throw the ball. He can run with the ball. He's truly a do-it-all player. And I think the success of Brock Bowers this past year with the Raiders shows everyone how a young tight end can be the focal point of your offense.
And when you go back and move to specific needs, and I know you mentioned this too, where quarterback is always the big thing that kind of decides the draft, but also edge rusher too. Abdul Carter's number 1, obviously in a lot of people's draft boards. But how do you see the edge class also shaking out? Because when you talk about the trenches, kind of going back to what you were saying before, how loaded this is, guys like Mason Graham are going to help decide how that shakes out. But also when you think about Abdul Carter, James Pierce Jr., could the Bears maybe throw that curveball and take an edge rusher at 10 instead of going offensive lineman, or should they just keep it simple and fix the fact that you gave up over 60 sacks last year?
Well, I think we got to see what happens in free agency. If you can add Trey Smith at guard and Drew Dahlman at center, then by all means, take a pass rusher at number 10 overall. That's the best player on the board. But it is a loaded group. Abdul Carter is my number 1 overall player. I think he has the tools to be an elite NFL edge rusher. And he's only getting better after playing the position for just one full season at Penn State. But there's a lot of depth. Michael Williams and Jalen Walker from Georgia are both going to be top 15 picks. You mentioned James Pierce Jr., Mike Green from Marshall. It is such a deep group at that position that even into round 2 and maybe round 3, there will be impact players. So I do think with the Bears, it so much depends on what happens in free agency. Can they shore up guard and center before we even get to the draft? If so, I think that becomes pretty exciting because now you have that ability to not draft for need. You can draft based on impact players and truly best player available.
Yeah, to speak of the excitement around Chicago, obviously when you go through a 5-12 season, a lot of the excitement that was there last year with Caleb just kind of dissipated, sputtered a little bit. But when you think about the excitement now, how excited should Bears fans be? Because like you mentioned, if you fix the interior of the offensive line, Braxton's a guy that's played for a couple of years. He's got NFL experience. Darnell Wright, is looking like a guy that's going to be a mainstay at tackle for the Bears. How do you view the excitement around Chicago? How excited should Bears fans be, especially for this specific draft?
I think you have to be really excited, especially with money to spend in free agency. That positions you so well for a draft where your team needs, and I think the right way to build the team, through the trenches, that's where the wealth of this draft class is. So it might not be the most exciting, flashy draft with a quarterback and a wide receiver in the top 10 picks like last year, but I think this is one of those years where you truly build the nucleus and the foundation of your team because you're going to be able to address, whether it be guard, center, defensive tackle, defensive end, the needs line up so well with where the value is this year.
Yeah, and I guess lastly, when you think about the specifics of this draft, what's the one thing that excites you the most? Is it going to be the combine next week to see kind of how those tiebreakers shake up right now? Or what's some of the things that excite you the most, especially about how the process could play out? Because obviously every single year the process is different, but this year you never know. What excites you the most?
It's definitely the combine. Because of the extended season, because of how long the college football playoffs ran, it's just been a gap since we've seen a lot of these guys play, especially the players who weren't in the CFP. So I'm super excited for the combine to get out there to see some of those tiebreakers, to watch the wide receivers and corners. And this is a great running back class. I want to see those guys in person. So the combine is when it really starts to feel like draft season for the entire NFL because we've got the Super Bowl in the rear view. So it's going to be a fun week in Indianapolis, and I'm really looking forward to it.
I am too. I'll be there as well, so I'll come find you and say hi. I appreciate you taking the time, Matt, today. I love talking draft, especially with someone like yourself. You know so much about it. You do a great job, and I appreciate every second that you gave today.
Yeah, you bet.
Awesome. That was Matt Miller, ESPN draft analyst and fellow nerd. Big fan of draft nerds. I've been one since I was about 10 years old when I first started getting into the draft, going back to the 2004 NFL draft, with Tommy Harris being the Bears' first-round pick that year. This one specifically gets a little interesting when you think outside of the box a little bit. And I talked about curveballs going on in the first round. One team that I know specifically is maybe not looking at them as a curveball team right now, but you think about a little bit some of the things that could develop going into free agency. Matt talked about Trey Smith coming to the Bears. Drew Dahlman maybe being a signee for the Bears as well. If they shore up the interior of the offensive line, you never know who they're going to take. You never know what direction they might go. When it comes to the San Francisco 49ers, that's a team that I'm watching. Granted, this is just speculation, not reporting anything at all. I'm not even, putting myself out there saying this is going to happen, but it's a team that I'm really watching because they have Brock Purdy at quarterback. He's coming up on a contract situation. You've got Deebo Samuel, a guy that is looking at trade offers to leaving San Francisco. What happens if they trade Deebo, get a first-round pick in late round of the first round? We're looking at a San Francisco 49ers team that was in the Super Bowl last season, having 2 first-round picks who could move into the top 10, mortgage that first-round pick, maybe a little bit extra draft capital, to get one of those quarterbacks, depending on what happens with Brock Purdy. You never know what's going to happen. I think that's what truly makes draft season exciting, especially when you know there's so much that could happen, things that you want to see happen. I think it'd be crazy to have a whole first round just kind of go up in flames. But when you think about the future of the NFL and teams that are contenders that don't need draft capital, the 49ers are one of those teams. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens there, especially with the Bears. Like I mentioned before when I was talking to Matt, I've covered guys like Luther Burden III when he was at Mizzou, when he committed to Mizzou, and also Armand Membo, who is also a guy that was at Mizzou for a while, kind of started at guard, kicked into tackle, could have come back to Mizzou for the other season, but decided to go to the draft as well. And I think his stock could even soar even higher when it comes to the combine. We're excited to see how all this plays out, how all these things happen, and frankly, what the Bears do, because I think that's the excitement that was here last year in Chicago. We'll see it here again.